Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the invited paper session, IPS 158, Data Science in Estimating Informal Sectors and Gig Workers at the 63rd ISI World Statistic Congress 2021. I am Dr. Muhammad Uzair Mahidin, Chief Statistician Malaysia, and I will be the chair for this session. The pandemic has changed the way we work and live, where we have to adapt with new ways of doing things. Accordingly, this year's Congress is being held virtually for the first time in history, along with travel restrictions that are still being imposed in many countries. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you, the delegates, wherever you may be. Ladies and gentlemen, the development of economic activity in the informal employment sector, including the gig economy, is currently being a trend involving a number of people. Generally, the informal labor market consists of production, distribution, and consumption of goods and services that are not accounted for informal measurement of the economy. Informal economy activities can include doing jobs or providing services for which you are paid in cash, such as home renovation and car repairs. However, it is not considered as part of the formal labor market economy, as it is unregulated. No taxes are paid, and some of them are not covered by the social safety net without any guarantee in the form of insurance coverage. Besides that, several difficulties arise when it comes to identify which of these jobs can be defined as informal. To have in-depth discussion on this topic, let me introduce our three speakers. The first speaker is Mr. Jonathan Gersendorfer from United Nations Statistics Division. He is an associate statistician and secretariat for the Joint Team on the Informal Economy. The task team developed conceptual recommendations that will be included in the update of the System of National Account 2008 and the 6th edition of the Balance of Payment Manual. Alongside with this recommendation, the task team will also develop practical guidance for their implementation. Jonathan was a master degree holder in statistics from Social and Economic Studies and has 2 bachelor degrees in social work and sociology with minor statistics. Before joining the United Nations Statistics Division in 2018, he worked as a researcher in the German Institute for Employment Research. Today, he will share his paper entitled Conceptual Framework for the Informal Economy, which discuss on the concept and definition related to the informal economy across all statistical datasets that are acceptable to labor statistics and macroeconomic statistician. Our second speaker is Professor Jack Chams from Center for Population and Development, CEPED, University Paris, Descartes, IRD. Jack Chams is an economist and statistician, currently Emeritus Research Director at the French Scientific Research Institute for Development at IRD. His main field of research focus on informality, labor market, unpaid work, women economic participation, and empowerment and time use. He involved in drafting the new international definition of informal sector adopted in 1993 and definition of informal employment. Also, the 2013 ILO manual on measuring informality, a statistical manual for the measurement of informal sector and informal employment. In addition, he is the author of two recently published books titled Dimension of Resilience in Developing Countries, Informality, Solidarity, and Care Work, and the Research Handbook on Development and the Informal Economy. Today, he will present his paper on digitization and the informal economy, scope and measurement challenge. This paper asks whether this concept and the related methods of measurement are still valid in time when digitalization and the economic platforms are expanding rapidly and transforming the world of work all over the world. Our last speaker for today is Ms. Hawati Abdul Hamid, a senior research associate from Hazana Research Institute of Malaysia. She is a recognized expert in socioeconomic issues such as inequality, social mobility, and social protection, as well as labor market issues. Prior to joining KRI, she worked at the Security Commission Malaysia, University Technology MARA UiTM, and National News Agency Malaysia bernama. Hawati holds a master's degree in International Development Studies from the Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, Tokyo, Japan, and Executive MBA from University Technology MARA. She obtained her MBA in Economics with Computing from the University of Kent, United Kingdom. Today, she is going to share with us her paper on estimating informal employment in Malaysia. The discussion will be focusing on the measurement of worker-based informality, defined as workers who do not get ample legally mandated benefits such as paid leave, rest, sick, and maternity, and other forms of social protection through their employment. As this is a pre-recorded session, so there will be no live Q&A session. If you have any question or comment, kindly leave them in the chat box. The answer from respective speaker will be available after release. Without further ado, I would like to invite the speakers for their presentation. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jonathan Gessendorfer. I'm an associate statistician at the National Accounts section of the United Nations Statistics Division. And the first thing I want to say is thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk at this session, and thank you to everyone who is tuning in to this session. One small disclaimer here. I'm not here as the sole or even the main author of a paper, but rather as the secretariat of an international task team on the informal economy. And my presentation today is on the current status of the main objective of this task team. And that main objective is to develop a conceptual framework for the informal economy. And the task team builds on the work and is in close collaboration with the International Labour Organization working group on the revision of the standards for statistics on informality. And although the work of the task team is far from finished, it is not unreasonable to expect that this conceptual framework, or something like it, will be included in the update of the System of National Accounts 2008 and the 6th edition of the Balance of Payments Manual. So why do we need a framework, a conceptual framework for the informal economy? The reason is that the informal economy as a concept has only been developed for policy analysis. However, there's never been a set of internationally recognized statistical definitions, so there's no statistical framework for the informal economy. And this has many negative consequences, and the most important, most general consequence is that terms are used ambiguously and they are used unclearly. For example, informal sector, informal economy, underground economy, and the non-observed economy are used sometimes synonymously, but for other people, they have very distinct meanings from each other. This ambiguity also leads to misunderstandings for example, some people are of the impression that any production in the informal sector is not measured in GDP, which is incorrect. And that the GDP is underestimated by the size of the informal economy, which is equally incorrect. And lastly, this ambiguity leads to a lack of international comparability in statistics on informality. So this table here is the current version of the conceptual framework for the informal economy, or basically a representation of this conceptual framework that I can show in a slide. And the main goal for today's talk is to break this table down and to understand the main aspects of this conceptual framework. The two overarching terms in the framework are informal productive activities and the informal economy. Informal productive activities are defined as all productive activities carried out by persons and economic units that are, in law or in practice, not covered by formal arrangements. And the informal economy is simply the sum of all informal productive activities. So going back to the table, you can see in bold and highlighted the informal economy and informal productive activities. Both are overarching concept. They cover the whole framework. Very importantly, the informal economy goes beyond the SNA production boundary, but covers the whole SNA general production boundary. So that means that one type of informal productive activities, the production of services not for pay or profit, and for basically households producing services for their own final consumption, is not included in the SNA production boundary. It is, however, included in the general production boundary. So this means that the informal activities in the informal economy go beyond what is included in GDP. Looking at a subset basically of the informal economy, and that is the informal market economy. And those are all informal productive activities for pay or profit. So on top here you see only those for pay or profit. Going back, here we exclude those that are not for pay or profit. Then everything that is happening here, that is happening in the informal market economy, is included in the SNA production boundary. And one important thing to understand about this whole table is that the top side here is concerning the worker side of the framework, and the bottom half is concerned with the economic units side of the framework. So let's look at them separately for a little bit for the informal market economy. So looking at workers, what is part of the informal market economy is all informal employment and all formal employment that has partly informal activities. Actually, it is all informal activities that are performed within formal employment. And they can either be main or secondary jobs both of them, and both of them can be carried out in the formal sector or in the households with paid domestic workers. However, in the informal sector, everything in the informal sector is required to be informal employment. So there can't be formal employment outside of. Basically, you cannot, as an informal economic unit, you can't have formal employment and formal employees. So this means inclusion of informally employed and inclusion of informal activities of formal employees means that own-use production workers, unpaid trainees, and volunteer workers are not included in the informal market economy. On the other side, looking at the economic unit side, we include the informal sector, and the part of the formal sector that is the informal productive activities, basically for pay or profit within the formal sector. So looking at that compared to our overarching table is we exclude the households producing for their own final use. And that includes direct volunteer work and non-formal, non-profit institutions. So all of those are not contributing to the informal market economy. Now, we go even more specific and look at the informal sector specifically. And in the informal sector, so for an economic unit to be part of the informal sector, there are two requirements that need to be met. So the first one is the economic unit can't be formally recognized. If it is formally recognized, it is automatically in the formal sector. And as long as if it is not formally recognized, and the production is mainly intended for the market with the purpose of receiving a profit, that economic unit will be in the informal sector. If the production is not mainly intended for the market, and then we are in the household own use production sector. The informal sector, looking at the informal sector, you are looking at it very closely, this new definition. There are a few core differences compared to what is currently in the 2008 SMA. And the most important differences is that unincorporated households enterprises require their production to be mainly intended for the market. In the 2008 SMA, the requirement was weaker, using the at least some production for the market phrasing. And informal unincorporated household enterprises in the agriculture sector are now also part of the informal sector. And lastly, the requirement that enterprises in the informal sector have to be liable to become informal is also included. And what this means implicitly is that we exclude economic units that perform illegal activities that are not only illegal due to the informality of the economic unit. So that means an economic unit or a household unincorporated enterprise that is producing drugs, illegal drugs, that is not part of the informal sector because it is not liable to become informal. Because the production would be illegal even if the economic unit would be formal. The ILO working group is proposing that inclusion into the definition of the informal sector because that means that because the requirements for policy are different, or the reason why we want to measure those are different, and pooling them. So basically pooling those that where policy wants the economic unit to become formal with those where they don't want this production to happen at all is not helpful for policy analysis. That's basically the core argument why this this exclusion of illegal activities may happen. And that is it from my side already. Thank you for your attention. I'm very much looking forward to the next two presentations in the session, because another goal for our task team on the informal economy is also to look at the impact of digitalization on the informal economy, and also look at digitalization as a data resource on the informal economy. Thank you all for listening, and again, thank you for the invitation.
My presentation is about digitization and the informal economy. Nothing could seem further from digitization than the small micro-businesses of the informal sector, characterized by low levels of technology. But at the same time, it is conceivable that the platform economy and the digitalization process foster the development of informal jobs. It's been more than 50 years since informality was incorporated within the Conceptual Framework and Toolkit for the measurement of labor force and employment, and even earlier within the System of National Accounts and the measurement of GDP. As soon as the 1968 System of National Accounts, the premise of what the 15th International Conference of Labor Statisticians was to adopt at the definition of micro-businesses in the informal sector in 1993 was presented. Later on, the expansion of new forms of precarious jobs as a result of the globalization process led to the adoption of a broader concept of informal employment by the 17th ICLS in 2003. So what is the informal economy? It is not the shadow of the illegal economy estimated via econometric models. It is comprised of four components: the non-registered, unincorporated micro-businesses run by own account workers and small employers with less than 5 paid employees, or the informal sector, strictly speaking. Second, the non-registered paid employees of formal firms. Third, the non-registered employees of households, the domestic workers. And finally, the producers of goods for own final use. Informal employment as a proportion of non-agricultural employment is the indicator of SDG 8.3. The size of the informal economy is known through recent compilation by the ILO in 2018 that estimate at more than 2 billion the number of women and men working in the informal economy across the world. And that represents 61% of total employment and 50.5% of total non-agricultural employment. It is in sub-Saharan Africa that informal employment rates are the highest, 75% in average, against 64% in Southern and Southeastern Asia, 55% in Latin America, and 22% in transition economy of Eastern Europe and Central Asia. In developed countries, the rates range from 5% in Finland to more than 25% in Greece and Spain. And in terms of contribution to GDP, estimates range from 19% in transition countries to 29% in Latin America and 65% in sub-Saharan Africa. And in terms of non-agricultural value added, these rates range from 14% in transition economy, 26% in Latin America and Asia, and 38% in sub-Saharan Africa. In which context the informal economy emerged and grew. Emergence reflects emergence of the informal economy occurred in developing countries as reflecting the economic and social changes with the penetration and expansion of the market economy in rural and pre-capitalist societies through a historic process of rural-urban migration that provided labor surpluses to nascent industries. Then the expansion of the market economy occurred through the globalization process, along with the succession of crises, oil, debt, structural adjustments, and finally the 2008 financial crisis. During this expansion process, the informal sector became the cradle hosting newly created micro-businesses, as well as the safety valve absorbing the rejected or subcontracted low-paid workers by formal firms struggling with harsher competition conditions. Then came the digital revolution. With the entry into the digital revolution, technological change intervened through various channels and on several aspects of informality. Firstly, cell phones and smartphones have for long begun to be in use among the informal operators and more broadly among the population in developing countries, even in rural areas. Secondly, it's been a long time that digital skills have penetrated the informal economy, and such type of skills failed to protect from unemployment and to guarantee formal employment to their holders. So they came to informal jobs. Thirdly, digitalization facilitates home-based work and the extreme fragmentation of work, two characteristics of informal work. The challenges posed to the informal economy by the digital revolutions in terms of scope and measurement. The platform economy is mainly comprised of two components. First, the web-based platforms where work is outsourced through an open call to a geographically dispersed crowd, the crowd workers, generally for performing microtasks, such as collection of data or other information to train machine learning algorithms, tasks related to programming and coding, classification of entities into groups, detecting if any of the material posted on the website might violate local laws, social norms, or platforms' guidelines, verifying and cleaning existing data or classifications. And second, location-based applications, which allocate work to individuals in a specific geographical area, for example, taxi or delivery services such as Uber or Deliveroo. The size of the platform economy is not well known. Various estimates exist that range from 0.5% of total labor force in the US in 2017, 1% of total employment, still in the US in 2017, 4.5% of total earned income on platform over the past year in the US, even to up to 44% of total adults having purchased or used one of the platform services. In Sweden and in 7 EU countries, the rate of employment in the platform economies range from 4.5% to 12% of adults or working age population performing crowd work at least weekly. The challenges of the measurement of work on the platform economy is that all the adult working age population is concerned and likely to be involved, not only the active, the occupied, or even the unemployed. Therefore, labor force surveys should extend the questions to the inactive and the unemployed, all the working age population, as well as to secondary activities performed by the occupied population as multiple jobs. Another challenge is that not all the activities of platforms are related to work. Another one is the extreme fragmentation of tasks and pay. And finally, the platform economy spreads over a wide spectrum of jobs and situations, from casual click workers to drivers, deliverers, even artists and highly skilled consultants. Difficulties arise when it comes to identify which of the digital jobs are informal. In 2018, the International Classification of Status in Employment was proposed to revision by the International Labour Organization according to the type of authority or the type of economic risk. Dependent workers are comprised of dependent contractors, employees, and contributing family workers. Dependent contractors, which we are especially interested in this paper, are employed for profit, and they are paid by way of commercial transaction. They are therefore usually responsible for arranging their own social insurance and other social contribution. And we know that this is one of the criteria used to define informal employment as the type of registration. One or more of the following characteristics may be relevant for their identification in statistical collections. First, their work is organized or supervised by another economic unit as a client, or as an entity that mediates access to clients. Second, the price paid for the goods produced or services provided is determined by the client or an intermediary. And third, the actual working arrangements or conditions may closely resemble those of employees. An interesting experience of survey was attempted by the ILO in 2017-18. As there is no database for listing the platform workers, it is impossible to select from a list. So the ILO put an advertisement on the platforms at different times of the day for performing a paid task on the platform. So the paid tasks consisted in the fulfilling of questionnaire covering various aspects of working and living conditions of the workers. The risks, of course, are those of self-selections, unsure representativeness, and use of multiple accounts by same respondents. So, in conclusion, we could say that little is known on the real magnitude of work in the digital economy, especially the relative size of its informal component. Recourse to big data produced by the platforms remains indispensable for assessing the magnitude of the work they generate. And among the recommendations to be made for survey statisticians, for instance, is to extend questionnaires to the working age population and as a complement for the active population. Drawing on ICSE 18, it could be necessary to adapt labor force surveys questionnaire in relation with the formal-informal divide and identify what types of big data could be used to this aim. Thank you for your attention.
Hi, my name is Hawati Abdul Hamid. I am a researcher at Khazanah Research Institute, a think tank based in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. In this presentation, I will be talking about informal sector in the context of labour market in Malaysia and how we attempt to estimate the incidence of informal employment, a concept that extends beyond the current narrow definition in measuring informal sector in Malaysia. The Department of Statistics Malaysia has been publishing employment statistics for the informal sector using the firm-based concept via its Informal Sector Workforce Survey. Here, informality is assessed based on the registration status of the entity that the workers work for. Workers are considered to be informal if the firm or the employer that hired them are profit-oriented, had less than 10 workers, but yet they are not registered with the company registrar or the local government. In this survey, workers in agricultural activities are excluded due to sampling demand and survey complexity of agricultural activities. Chart on the left shows that in 2019, 1.3 million workers were recorded to be working in the informal sector, making up about 8.3% of the total employment. Chart on the right shows that employment in the informal sector was trending down. Employment in the informal sector was trending up between 2010 and 2015, with the number of workers rising from 1 million to 1.4 million. However, the number has been trending down since 2015, declining to 1.3 million in 2019. So with less than 10% of total employment, informal work in Malaysia appear to be very small. As a comparison, the ILO estimated that the informal employment accounted for more than half of the total global employment, while the estimate for developing and emerging countries is even higher at 70%. The huge difference between Malaysia's informal sector and the global average largely stem from the exclusion of employment in agriculture sector. This resulted in underestimation of rural-based informal sector, which can be quite high in some states. If we assume most agriculture activities are as informal, incidence of informality could double. The low incidence of informality as reported by the official statistic is also not consistent with the type of firms operating in Malaysia. The chart on the right shows that almost half of firms in Malaysia were micro and small enterprises, and another 16% are medium-sized firms. The fact that there are very large proportion of enterprises in Malaysia are SME, this raises question to whether these enterprises are able to provide formal employment for their workers with adequate provision of social protection and benefit. Arguably, the data from the informal sector workforce survey is not sufficient to show the true extent of informality in Malaysia, as the emphasis was only placed on the registration status of the firm. As part of the decent work agenda, the ILO has been promoting a broader concept of informality, emphasizing the worker-based approach. Workers are considered to have informal jobs if their employment arrangement, either in law or in practice, are not subjected to the National Labour Registration and Tax Policy and not covered by a formal social protection or not entitled for certain employment benefits such as paid leaves and medical benefits. Measuring informality based on these characteristics using data collection methods requires granularity in the design of survey, since the emphasis should be placed on measuring the actual employment situation rather than legal entitlement. Undeniably, this process can be demanding and costly, which may explain the slow adoption of the ILO recommendation in full by some countries, although currently more than 100 countries have already been measuring informality based on this expanded definition. Although Malaysia is currently not among the countries covered in the ILO database on informal employment, the Department of Statistics is now in progress to develop a full framework of informal employment comprising of workers in both informal and formal enterprises as well as household. The latest publication of the Informal Sector Workers Survey for 2019 has provided the directly measured workers-based informality statistic. The data for 2019 suggests that the number of informal workers was 2.5 million or 17% of total employment. However, socio-economic breakdown is currently not available, and the absence of past data renders trend analysis not possible. The latest survey also excludes workers in the agriculture sector. In light of data scarcity, one of the intermediate approaches proposed by the ILO is to estimate informality based on the information of employment status already available in the labour force survey. In this regard, the number of informal workers can be deduced by looking at the statistics of the workers in two categories. First, the self-employed workers working for their own enterprises. Second, the unpaid family workers, regardless whether they work for a registered or unregistered enterprises. The underpinning reason that these two groups are given attention is because they are often considered as more vulnerable form of employment, with workers typically not having formal working arrangement, hence they are more likely to suffer from decent work deficits. Based on this qualification, chart on the left shows that 3.3 million workers or 22% of total employment in 2019 can be considered as informal. Longer time series data in the chart on the right shows that informality, when measured via this definition, is declining, with the share of self-employed and unpaid family workers as percentage of total employment falling from 34% to 24% between 1982 and 2019. However, when broken down further, it can be seen that the shrinking in the share was largely contributed by the decline in the unpaid family worker share that has fallen from 11% to 5%. As the share for self-employment, the trend has been trending up in more recent years. For example, the share of self-employed alone has risen from the lowest point of 60% in 2003 to 18% in 2019, similar to the share in the late 1980s and early 1990s. This suggests that while the traditional form of informality continue to persist, new forms of informality is emerging in the labour market, such as the work in the gig economy that has increased due to the growth of digital technology. Beyond the self-employed and unpaid family workers, workers hired by employer are considered to have informal job if their employment lacks social protection. This means that informality can exist within the formal sector. This phenomenon is commonly referred to as the informalization of jobs. While most employees in registered firms are considered to be working in the formal sector, workers who are inadequately covered with social protection benefit are considered to have informal jobs. This is also the case even though the hiring firms are formally registered with the relevant authorities. To account for this form of informalization and in the absence of granular data, we adopt a deductive approach to indirectly estimate the extent of informal employment that could exist in both formal and informal sector. This is done by calculating the discrepancy between total employment and formal employment. In Malaysia, we have two institutions that provide social protection services. One is the Social Security Organisation or SOCSO, and second is the Employee Provident Fund, EPF, that manage the retirement saving. We attempted to estimate the prevalence of informal employment by utilizing the administrative data from these two institutions, as well as data for public sector workers which are considered as formal sector workers. And then we compare it against the labour force survey data. Estimation via this residual method shows that the incidence of worker-based informality goes even higher to around 40% compared to the informal sector employment that I mentioned before at 8.3%, and the preceding estimate based on self-employment and unpaid family workers at 22% we saw earlier. Chart on the left shows that there were close to 6 million workers or 39% of total employment with without retirement arrangement that could protect them against the old age risk. Meanwhile, the number of workers without social protection for work-related accident were 5.2 million or 34% of total employment. A longer time trend indicates that worker-based informality increased quite considerably between 2005 and 2015. The chart on the left shows that the number of workers unprotected by Social Security insurance had increased during the 10-year period compared to the total employment, which has increased slightly at a lower pace. In recent years, the incidence of informality is observed to improve only marginally. The notable decline of workers without social protection from 42% in 2015 to 34% in 2019 can be explained by the expansion of coverage by this scheme to include foreign workers in 2019, which was previously not covered in the National Social Security Scheme. As a proportion of total employment, chart on the right shows that while the share have moved in a downward trajectory since 2010, comparison between 2015 and 2019 reveal that the trends remain relatively flat. This coincides with the increasing number of self-employed workers in the labour force that have risen as rapidly as total employment in recent years, hence partly explain the flattened trend. More importantly, the incidence of informality is found to be 4 times higher than the official statistic based on the employment in the informal sector, or what we call as firm-based informality. At the global level, worker-based informality is estimated to comprise 62% of total employment in 2016. As can be seen in chart on the left, an inverse correlation between the share of informal employment and the country's income level can be observed, with developed countries experiencing a lower prevalence of informal employment. As mentioned earlier, official statistics in Malaysia only measured the firm-based informality, which was found to be quite small at 8.3% of total employment. When estimated via an indirect approach that we attempted to do, the extent of informality in Malaysia is found to be around 40% of total employment. While Malaysia worker-based informality is higher than its firm-based informality, chart on the right shows that the percentage in Malaysia is lower compared to other countries in ASEAN region, only second after Brunei at 32%. To conclude, based on deductive estimation approach, we found that the size of informality, or the broader definition of informal work, is almost 4 times larger than the size of the narrow definition based on firm registration status. The much higher incidence of worker-based informality than the firm-based informality may also signal a higher compliance of business registration, but not in the compliance of social protection for the workers. The recent informal sector survey in 2019 have already put an attempt to directly measure worker-based informality using microdata. Nevertheless, the comparison of informal employment remain unknown, as the estimation cannot be further disaggregated by demographic characteristics. As stressed by the ILO, this highlights the need for Malaysia to expand its regular data collection beyond the firm-based, but also to include the worker-based concept of informality. Thank you. For full detail of this research, you can find the paper at our website at www.krinstitute.org. Thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, we have reached to the end, which I believe all of us have obtained a fruitful discussion. In this virtual 63rd of ISI World Statistics Congress 2021, where the main theme is data science in estimating informal sectors and gig workers, we have learned a lot from our 3 invited speakers who have shared their interesting work. Once again, on behalf of the committee, thank you for delivering such important material so that all of us can deepen our knowledge involving data science in estimating informal sectors and gig workers. Recently, I would also like to thank all speakers and participants who have joined this conference. I am certain that every speaker has presented the application involved for estimating the informal sectors and gig workers. I sincerely hope that through your presentation and discussion afterward, all of us can contribute in solving the estimation of informal sectors in our countries. Even though the contribution might be small, it is still valuable. As with all such events, and this conference has been outstanding example, our minds have been assailed by a torrent of ideas, information, statistic, interpretation, and vision. We have complete ideas about the measurement of worker-based informality, concept, and the related method of measurement, whether it is still valid in time when digitization and the economy of platform are expanding rapidly. We also got some ideas about the concept of informal economy, which has been developed for policy analysis, and a few discussions on the economic literature that has never been developed as a statistical concept from our excellent speakers. There is indeed plenty to reflect upon, and if this anyway enhance our individual and collective contribution, to meeting the digitalization challenges, then the seminar can truly be adjudged a success. Last but not least, I would like to thank again all the committee members for organizing this conference. With their presence has been invaluable and without any doubt has helped make the event a great success. I would also like to apologize for any inconvenience that you might experience during this conference. Ladies and gentlemen, I do also hope that we can meet again in the next Congress. Thank you.